now going to.
Okay. Hi, Martin.
Okay. Hi.
Lovely to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Hi. So, what did everybody think of Mr. Noonan's? And Martin, you read, it was you, right, who posted more Noonan?
Yeah, there was a webinar that he did a couple of months ago that I attended. It was for TESOL, and he was speaking about, I think about 20 years ago, they had a kind of discussion in TESOL about the skills we would need for the 21st century. And he was kind of coming back to that 20 years later.
Mm.
So
I haven't kept up with the
webinar?
forum this week. I'll look forward to that.
Yeah, talks about some of the skills that are similar to what he talks about in the book, actually. So a lot of the themes are very similar, particularly on skills and on also what he says about preparing people for the kind of the future of work that, you know, as we've heard from a lot of other people, that a lot of the jobs that will be around in 10, 20 years time don't exist yet. But so how do we prepare people for those kinds of situations? Yeah.
And you know what, I was thinking about that question. So my son is not too long out of university, and he got his undergraduate degree and got a job. And at a certain point, he was thinking that he might like to get more training or information or whatever on computer science and coding. So he's thinking, well, maybe I could take a year or two off and get a master's degree. Or what people do now is they go to coding boot camp, which is kind of 2 to 4 months of intensive coding experience. And he said, you miss the sort of the deeper knowledge and the fundamental underpinnings. On the other hand, an MA course moves too slowly, so that when you're finished, you don't have the skills that employers will immediately hire for. And what he's found with the jobs he subsequently took is that even coding boot camp would be too slow. And it's almost sort of the Japanese system of, you know, they hire a person that they think would be a good employee, and then whatever they need to know, they learn on the job, because it's always changing and shifting and whatnot. Yeah. So, but if we're moving back, or maybe for Americans even into, for the first time, a model where jobs provide job training, then I also think educators could be doing less of the sort of job training and more of the, you know, what Scott Walker would not like, the liberal arts curriculum, right? Where you do learn how to communicate and write. And I mean, it's interesting that we see so many employers, and there are always these surveys that turn up saying that everybody needs soft skills. But I don't see any high school classes turning around and focusing on soft skills. So, and it seems to me that would be harder to pick up than knowledge of how to run some kind of piece of software. That you can learn. Be a good communicator is a little harder to pick up in a weekend webinar.
Yeah, definitely true. I think soft skills is something that's going to be hard to pin down in schools. For example, you wouldn't really want to find, you know, in the afternoon, you're doing an hour of geography and then an hour of communication skills and then another hour of physical education. It's not going to work like that, I think.
Right. 20 minutes of leadership before you go to Spanish class, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be all kind of woven through all the other subjects, or, you know, dumped on the languages.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think as educators also, we have to maybe think about how we're going to model those skills that we want young people to, you know, kind of grow into. How are we showing leadership? How are we showing compassion? How are we showing all the other skills that we would want?
Which of course then raises the question, what do you do if teachers don't have those skills themselves? But
yeah, I mean, I know when we started remote learning here, I definitely did not feel I was, you know, ready, technologically ready. But in fact, that, I don't want to say it worked in my favor, but the students, I was very open about what my struggles, and we were definitely learning together.
Yeah.
What, you know, anything I knew, I would teach them, and if they knew, you know, they made a good class community where they could teach each other. Because if it was Windows, I was really not going to be able to, but
And I
Masa
don't,
Kun was on it.
yeah.
Go, he seemed to be very, knowledgeable there. And so that, the peer learning and things could happen. So
I like the cat tail.
yes, we have.
That's great. I mean, I don't know to what extent this is true for people in their 20s or in their teens, but at least with people my age, because everything's new. If someone turns up and says,
Mhm.
I don't know how to do this in Microsoft Word, nobody's judgmental, because 10 minutes later, they're going to be asking a question of, why can't I find this when I search for that? It's like everybody's assumed to be weak at something and strong at something. Whereas I feel more shocked when I encounter somebody who can't tell time with an analog clock.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you mean you can't tell time? But which kind of makes sense if you've never had to deal with a clock face. But if somebody
Mhm.
tells me they don't know how to use track changes in Word, which I use all day, every day, and have for decades, I still don't feel surprised or judgmental.
Mhm.
I have an author who's a retired university professor, and she's written a novel that I'm editing. And indeed, she had never used track changes. And I said, oh, well, let's just do a quick Zoom, share screen, and I'll show you how. And
Mhm.
but that it didn't seem, she wasn't embarrassed that she didn't know, she didn't think she couldn't learn it. It was just sort of, there are so many things.
Yeah.
Most people don't feel intimidated to say, I got a new phone, I have no idea where to find anything, help me with my phone. The people I see who are intimidated were people of my parents' generation, like my mom and dad, who are terrified, like, I can't use a Kindle, I didn't grow up with computers. I'm like, Mom, I didn't grow up with computers, which because you raised me. But already they were feeling this kind of, everybody else knows something, I know nothing, I can't ask, I don't want to display my ignorance, I'm just going to turn off. Whereas people my age and younger are kind of like, I don't know half the things, but I know the other half, so I'll just jump in there.
Yeah.
But I do love that quote that Noonan opened with from, Socrates, of education is the lighting of the flame, not the filling of a vessel. Isn't that still true? I mean, don't you teach that way?
It's been debated for a long time.
I
think it's also the argument between it's Socrates and Aristotle about whether education is to create enlightened individuals or is it to serve the state? And that's something that's been debated for a long time. I don't think it's necessarily either or.
Right. I mean, wouldn't the state be best served by enlightened individuals? I mean, I would hope, right?
You would think so, yeah.
You would think so. But thus the Scott Walker fear of, enlightened individuals might question some of my corruption. And I mean, I think Noonan was pretending to be diplomatic, but Walker is a horror. I mean, he's exactly the sort of person who would not want an army of enlightened individuals turning up and looking through things. So
yes, so
yeah, I think when he talks about the philosophers, it makes me think back to years and years ago when I was at university and learning about what other philosophers have said about this type of thing. Because if you're looking back, Plato and Socrates are 3,000 years ago, but more recently, there's other people. I think Thomas Hobbes, for example, said, I actually wrote this down, education is crucial to prevent the reproduction of improperly conceived interests of the sort that disrupt social order. And he was speaking after the English Revolution had led to about 1 million people dying in what is now the UK. And for him, socialization was equivalent to moral education. And later, Immanuel Kant kind of took up the other side of the argument and argued more for enlightened individuals, and that education was, more for that purpose. So there's a lot of, it's been part of kind of moral and political philosophy for a long time, ever since, the ancient Greeks.
And the US education is or we're going through a wave of book banning and challenging and anything that talks about a minority being oppressed might make white people feel bad, so the book needs to be banned. I mean, kind of like 1940s stuff or 50s stuff, and it's a little discouraging, that it looks like we're, and I don't know if that's a last gasp and then we shift forward again, or we'll go back to the dark ages. I don't know.
Yeah. I think we've got to think about the kind of example that if you're arguing that education is to serve the states, then we've also got to think about what example the people who represent the state, the politicians, are setting. Like in the UK at the moment, where there's all this, furore about the parties that were going on in Downing Street when they had the lockdowns, and the kind of hypocrisy that's associated with. But if that government stays in place, then young people might start to think, well, they partied when everybody was locked down. They partied when people were dying. So, next time we have a pandemic, or if we get a new wave of a new variant of, something happens after Omicron, are people just going to throw the rules out of the window because the government did?
Yeah. I mean, they could go, either way and say, we'll vote the bastards out, or they could go, oh, I guess there's no rules, nothing matters anymore. Why should I be careful if they're not careful?
Yeah.
It's hard to believe we've been doing this pandemic stuff for 2 years, though.
Yeah.
Seems it is just seems that Omicron is just kind of breaking in slowly into Taiwan right now. So
okay.
There's a lot of uncertainty about, like Lunar New Year is coming up, and a lot of people are, either putting their plans on hold. Some people are already canceling their plans because they think, it's another 2 weeks to go. What's the point of booking anything if
it's all going to be canceled? And here we're having, schools close classrooms and whatnot, not because everybody, not because there's an outbreak in the school, but because too many of the staff have tested positive, and there aren't teachers to be in the classrooms, and there aren't, airlines are canceling sort of 5 to 8% of their flights because people can't show up to work. And even if, Cornell University shut the whole campus because they had too many Omicron people testing positive, although they had no symptoms. They weren't students who were sick. They were students who, underwent spot testing or whatnot. So at least in the US, and, every geographical region it shows up, it could behave differently. But at least here, it seems to be way more contagious, but also much less serious, which also encourages people to say, well, then I don't care if I get it, if it doesn't matter. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So are you in Taiwan? Are you face-to-face classes, or are you online classes?
At the moment we are face-to-face. I got all my students in the classrooms. Whether that will change in the next couple of weeks, I don't know. We're preparing for it. We've already set up classes on Microsoft Teams, and we're prepared for that if it comes to it.
Ready to go. And when were you last all online?
About 2 months ago.
Oh wow! So pretty recently.
Okay, so
yeah, then we had our first term online, and then they brought all the students in. We're wearing masks in class, and we started off with dividers between each student and kind of separation as much as possible. But over time, that's been kind of eased a little bit, and then I think those restrictions might start to come back because of the new variant. But we'll see what happens for the new year when there's
And so what do your students feel about, how do they feel about being online versus being in person?
I think my students, they actually coped with it rather well. Also, last summer when our new students started, they were coming into the new course, and we started off online. So that was all they knew of us until they came down to the campus a couple of months ago. So I think I coped with it quite well. Some of my colleagues maybe, vary in how well they dealt with it, but we managed, as has everybody.
How about in Japan?
So I live in northern Japan, where, even a few weeks ago, we were 0 cases for like well over a month. And
Uh-huh.
so it's just been, so I was only online for one semester
Oh, wow.
a
Okay.
year and a
Yeah.
half ago. And then just spot of the different places, just here and there, we would have 2 weeks online when there was a small outbreak on the campus or something. So, but right now I'm all face to face and the semester is ending, and I think everyone's hoping we will stay face to face for the next
Yeah.
3 weeks.